I think it's clear to many New Zealanders that Australia is our most important partner across most spheres. Number one or number two on economic security, and of course people-to-people ties. And I think most of us would intuitively understand we don't loom as large for Australia. But what place does New Zealand hold in the minds of Australian policymakers, and what do they see as New Zealand's role in Australia's objectives for the region and for the world?
Well, yeah, I mean, New Zealand does loom really large for Canberra and all policymakers. I mean, I was one of them as an Australian diplomat for 14 years. And I learned that in my very first year when I joined DFAT's graduate program. And sitting right next to me in our cohort of 40 or 50 junior diplomats was a Kiwi diplomat who was there as part of our annual exchange. And that's just one. I mean, and I came to learn that there were like another couple dozen more Kiwi diplomats on exchange across DFAT and vice versa. And the same thing plays out across our defense ministries, our intelligence ministries, and beyond. So at that policymaker day-to-day level, it's just it's a really deep level of collaboration that is pretty obvious to any of us working in Wellington or Canberra. And maybe the challenge for us is to kind of sell that story a little bit more effectively out to folks, outside our capital cities. Yeah, and it goes beyond that though as well. I like any climate forum, any APEC summit, OECD, COP. You could pick any summit where we're both participating. And even Murray and I were both diplomats serving in the US. I mean, no matter where we are, we work very closely together because despite our occasional differences, we fundamentally share a lot of the same basic values and interests, and we're just constantly comparing notes. So, I think fundamentally, at the policy maker level, we work incredibly closely together. We work through whatever the issue is of the day, and there's always going to be issues. And I just hope we can all do a better job of making that story clearer to the folks outside. I know our High Commission in Wellington. It's always led by a very, very senior Australian diplomat. Right now, it's Daniel Sloper. It was previously Harinder Sidhu and Ewan MacDonald. I mean, these are our most senior Australian diplomats. And likewise, you've had former cabinet ministers like Annette representing New Zealand and Australia. So I don't think there should be any doubt about how we see each other at the policymaker level. And maybe there's more work we can do out selling that story a little better.
Great, thanks, Jeremy.
I always look at the Lowy poll each year to see just whether we maintain the top spot for how Australians think about New Zealanders. But interestingly, the Asia Pacific poll, was it, Stephen? The Institute's poll, where also has New Zealanders believe Australians are our best friends as well. So when the McKinsey Institute said there are no two countries closer on the planet, it doesn't mean we all agree with everything, but I found in my 5 years here that Australia and New Zealand are very close. We've got something like 80 supporting bilateral documents that covers everything from free trade of goods and services and labour market, mutual recognition of goods and services, and certainly the changes, I think, that were made by the Albanese government after the last, not the most recent, but the last election, have been really significant in terms of New Zealanders living in Australia, and something that the MFAT in particular fought very hard for, to get changes made to the conditions and Kiwis who've lived here for a long time. And so those changes that were made, the direct pathway to citizenship, which became effective from the 1st of July 2023, were really significant. I think someone said, well, that will mean a lot more Kiwis who become dual citizens voting for Labour. I suspect that would be at the back of the mind of the government, but I would be interested to know if they do a breakdown where you've got a lot of Kiwis who've got citizenship out of Queensland, whether they do an assessment of what impact the number of New Zealanders who were in, say, Jim Chalmers' electorate, or maybe even Peter Dutton's electorate, who then got the right to vote before the last election. But we should not underestimate just how important those changes were, having had so much stripped from us from 2001 onward and the tightening of the screws on New Zealanders over those years right up until those changes.
Thanks,
I mean,
Annette.
just to add, I think it's worth observing that, you know, we've got a really good thing going on here down in the South Pacific with Australia. And if you bear in mind the way we have achieved this over time and look at the difference that we have made, it is quite noticeable compared with the European Union and its attempts to create something similar, but through completely different mechanisms. And look at the rest of the world that's putting up bridges and borders and not bridges, walls and borders all over the place. But remember, though, one important thing that, you know, at the end of the day, and despite all this good stuff, you know, in many ways, Australia is more important to New Zealand than New Zealand is to Australia, you know, and that means it's to do with the size of economies, it's to do with a whole lot of things. And that means we always have to work hard on this relationship, which is precisely why we put excellent people into Canberra and why we really welcome Australia putting such excellent people here in Wellington.
Yeah, I guess I would just add, I think it's a really good point. We have a good story here. I think we've seen maybe play out elsewhere among neighbors and allies, maybe where some of that has been taken for granted, and then there's an election and whoops, you know, Canada and the United States are no longer friends. And so I think hopefully we can all learn from that lesson. And even though there's a good story, not take any of it for granted. I guess the other thing, you know, Stephen, you make a really good point about there is some asymmetry there just in our size. But I guess fundamentally, one of the ways I think about this relationship is the fact that in terms of size, both of us are fundamentally price takers internationally, not price makers. So both of us fundamentally aren't big or strong enough to reshape our region and reshape our world however we like. And the way we do that is through you know, an international system of laws and international institutions that we both fundamentally rely on being effective and credible. And so, you know, at the end of the day, while we've got differences in size, I mean, we've got a pretty shared vision that we really need that system to survive. And it's under a lot of pressure right now. So, I mean, when I think about how we work together, that's in the big picture sense where I really see it playing out. We really need this world system to not just survive, but thrive.
Mm.